Germany is preparing to head to the polls later today in an election that's expected to shape the political direction of the country and Europe as well. Latest opinion polls show a surge in support for the far-right AfD party, campaigning on an anti-immigration and conservative policy.
Now, their rise in popularity echoes similar political movements right across the continent. Well, earlier I spoke to Cathryn Cluver Ashbrook. She's the senior advisor at the Bertelsmann Foundation in Berlin. And she explained how the AfD could shape Germany's future.
They're not as long as the center holds. But what is true is not only is it a rise of the AfD, their numbers have frankly doubled from one election to another. And that is what is frightening for the centrist middle. That drove many thousands of Germans back to the streets today, a day ahead of the election, to protest what seems like an incredible rise by the far-right party in Germany.
And what's behind their success? What's behind their popularity?
Well, a lot of it is that voters, frankly, feel misunderstood by the traditional party elite. And what's been driving this particular election campaign, and I'll remind you, it's a very unusual thing to have a German election campaign in the winter. That was pushed by the dissolution of a very unusual historic coalition of three parties in the last parliament. That fell apart in December. And so to have a very quick 6-week run in the winter of discontent for many, driven by questions around the economy, their own personal finances, but primarily, at least in the public argument, also by concerns about migration, which, of course, a right-wing party is trying to ride all the way to success in the polls, although they will play no role in a next government.
Now, Cathryn, Germany won't have one major party in power. It would have to be a coalition simply because of the way the political system works. Who's likely to become chancellor next?
Well, the poll numbers indicate that the conservative leader, Friedrich Merz, will become the next chancellor, likely coalescing with the other large party, the Social Democrats. And that's a replay for many Germans of a long-held coalition that used to be governed by Chancellor Merkel. For the biggest part of her chancellery, the two biggest centrist parties were in a coalition together. That could promise stability for the country. Or it might, and this is what voters are skeptical about, mean that those two parties are unwilling to really tackle the massive changes this country needs to address right now, particularly in terms of the state of the economy. But their main goal will be locking out the right-wing voice, the right-wing vote, if you will, out of having a larger opinion in Parliament to continue to signal that Germany has learned from its Nazi past.
Just moving away from the domestic politics now, the next chancellor, of course, will have to contend with the new Trump administration. And Washington has made it quite clear that traditional alliances are being revised, shall we say. Where does that leave Germany's next government?
Well, for the time being, it still leaves Germany somewhat out in the cold, where you've seen other European countries get an American ambassador relatively quickly. The approvals are moving through Congress relatively quickly. There's been no ambassador promised to Germany. And frankly, because of the leadership crisis that has held Germany over the last weeks and months, the Germans are still looking to find a real strong line to the Trump administration. They tried at the Munich Security Conference, but failed. There, J.D. Vance, the vice president, met only with the leader of the far-right party, AfD, and they've tried in parliamentary terms. But we're seeing on the U.S. side how little Congress seems to be playing a role. So they'll need to very quickly, the new leader will very quickly need to find a strong line to the United States, or perhaps, again, be locked out of vital conversations on Europe's future.
And then, of course, there is the issue of the Ukraine war. Now, Germany has supplied Kyiv with weapons in the last 3 years of that Russia-Ukraine conflict. The US seems to be freezing Kyiv and European allies out of any peace negotiations. How will the next government in Berlin react to a Russia-US plan to end the conflict?
Well, we can already see from what we've heard from both of the lead candidates for chancellor, although again, the conservative is most likely to pull this out tomorrow, that they stand strong and firm in their support of Kyiv. They stand strong in support of Ukraine, which was fraudulently attacked. Again, this anniversary, 3-year anniversary coming just on the heels of this German election on Monday, February 24th. So the first thing that we're likely to hear from all leaders of Democratic parties is how united they stand behind Ukraine and how committed they are, potentially even under a new chancellery, in providing long-range missiles like many other European countries and the United States have to the Ukrainians to continue their fight for freedom ultimately, but fundamentally, first and foremost, for survival.
Okay, well, Europe does seem to be in a flux over the signals that it's receiving from the White House right now. It's shaken the foundation of these traditional alliances. I wonder if Germany is in the position to take up a security and political lead in Europe.
Well, I think that's what many want. That's certainly what many advisors want in the circles around Berlin. They want to see a strong government play a much larger, much weightier role in foreign affairs that aligns with Germany's economic power. So even though the German economy has been stagnating for the last 3 years, Germany remains the third biggest economic power in the world, and it needs to rise to its competences in foreign policy as well. That means taking a strong stance against what comes from Washington in protection of European security, but also, of course, investing much more in its defense capacities, much more in its foreign policy capacities, frankly, but really finding good ways to align with the rest of the European powers, particularly Poland, in making a strong argument to Washington that Europe needs to be ready to defend itself, will be ready to defend itself, perhaps not right away, but under the American nuclear umbrella, is committed to doing so in the very near future.
Cathryn Cluver Ashbrook from the Bertelsmann Foundation, we thank you so much for sharing your insights on Weekend Breakfast.
My great pleasure.